your finest source of ongoing careers advice for your burgeoning game career. Our wonderful panel is here tonight. I'm very grateful that they could join us. But before we get to introducing them and talking about the future of your games career, I wanted to quickly talk about how everything ends. How everything is going to end today is that after we've had an insightful, argumentative, hilarious panel, no pressure, and some Q&A to answer anything that you guys are still interested in hearing, we've got a whole bunch of people here tonight who are keen to talk to you. We've got a number of game companies who have representatives here, and those are companies who have open positions or who are interested in internships. And then we also have a good number of extremely generous volunteers from a variety of different disciplines within gaming. They're here for the sole purpose of just helping you out, giving you a quick portfolio review if you've brought something like that along, maybe taking a look at your resume if you want some advice on putting that together, answering just any Q&A that you have about what their role is like or how they got started or any of those kind of questions. So at the end of the session, anybody who falls into those groups, or anyone who's here from a company who has a table, or anyone who's just here as a volunteer to talk to people, feel free to just come up at the end and give everybody a little wave, and we'll just do a kind of one-sentence introduction to say who you are and what your field is, so that afterwards people can find you. And then we'll have some tables here from the employers once we're done, and then in a classroom over that way will be where the one-on-one sessions are going to be held. We'll guide you in whatever way you need guided at the end of this. But that's how this whole thing ends. How it begins is with these fine people. So I'm Margaret, hello. I have two hats, which may not be the last time we talk about hats. I'm a game director at Dots, which is a mobile puzzle studio based here in New York. Also the industry liaison for NYU, which is why I'm here tonight. And I'm going to do a quick ham-fisted introduction to each of these other people, so you get a sense of who's who. They are not in the order. It's just keep you on your toes. You can do this. I believe in you. Juliet. Over here. This is Juliet. Say hello. She's a senior manager of talent at Tilting Point, which is another New York-based game company. They're a studio they're a publishing house for mobile titles. Quick, pricey. Let's go to Mattia, who's right at the end. A familiar face to many. One of the founders of Gigantic Mechanic, one of New York's, I think, most iconic alternative gaming studios. Is that fair? David Liu is here, who I can't quite see, who's creative director of VR at Viacom. Just let that sink in. That's all I'm going to say about that. That's how this is. That's how the world is now.
Scary.
And then we have Joost here, who is the CEO and co-founder of Superdata, who are a gaming intelligence company. Is that the kind of thing? All right. Okay, so the reason I introduced these people is I wanted them to introduce themselves by answering this question: how did you get your first job in games? And let's just go left to right. Let's start with Joost.
All right, no pressure. So I'll try to make this as hilarious and informative as possible. My first job in games wasn't really a job because there was no job in games. I'm not a designer. I love what you guys do. I admire it, but I also had to recognize early on in my own career that I'm not that guy. I can't, I can program a little bit, I can hold my own in some of those languages, but I can't make the thing that makes me want to stay up late to play it and see it through as I grind or whatever. And so for the first instinct, it was like, well, what can I do as a sort of supportive role? And so I ended up on the business side, right? For lack of a better term, I'm one of the suits, if you want to call it that way. I help people understand what not to do when they say, well, we're going to raise $1 million or whatever. Here's how to not do that, or here's how you should do that. These are the people you should talk to. And so my first job was kind of just wandering into that set of questions about how do you build an organization or a group of people that can make something worthwhile, something, so realize you create a vision. What goes into that? Like, how do you build the factory?
But right? wait. Give me like concrete stuff. Where are you right now? Who's paying you money? How did you get them to pay you money?
So, speaking of hats, my second hat is I'm an academic, recovering, but academic nonetheless. So I'll just go on. and you'll never hear from these people. I did a PhD in video games when there was no curriculum, so I shopped around university to kind of find some material that I could study and kind of place video games. Business was sort of an angle, but very quickly I realized that there was a lot of people that didn't understand it. That narrative of gaming is now bigger than movies, bigger than music. That's kind of old news. It's been like that for 15 years. In my life growing up, music was never bigger than gaming because it was always bigger and more fun for me to do that. So I carved out a role where I was just a gun-for-hire analyst. Eventually realized that, I could do for myself with more freedom and more, curiosity satisfied flying solo that then eventually snowballed into a company. And so now there's 25 of us here in New York. I can tell you all about that too, but it's really, the first step was just to kind of go against the grain, which I don't take as a moment of pride, but more sort of there was no other option, and sort of you got to listen to what you want to do. So that's the short version for now.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. So, job. The first time I was being paid money to make a game. Does that work, I guess?
Yeah, perfect.
So I was a filmmaker for a very long time. A long time, I mean 5 years, I guess. I made things on TV to sort of get you to buy shit. So I was an ad guy. And a lot of that is like directing moments, directing emotions, and getting you to feel certain ways. And I thought I was okay at it, but I got really bored. So one day, me and my friends, we decided to, one of them was a theater practitioner, the other one was a programmer. And we got together like, how else can we direct attention and emotion? And we're like, well, I don't know, but maybe let's play a game and think about it. So obviously you can see where this ends. We're like, holy shit, maybe we should do something together, and that's what we did. We made an art project. It was you can now call it a big game, but it was essentially, as part of the art festival, we built the map for the art festival, but inside the map we hid a game. And that game, so the way we pitched it to the art festival was like, we'll make you the best map app ever, and you can pay us a certain money for that. And they bought it. And so that map app turned out to be a hidden immersive theater / big game where the map app would work, and at some point they would get like a faux SMS to go to a certain part of the map, and that's when he realized that one of the acts that he wanted to go for was canceled. And then it led them down this rabbit hole of basically treasure hunting, scanning QR codes. And at the end of the day, it was lots of fun, and I got paid for that. After that, I could not stop. I was like, shit, I should just quit film. The film is just not for me anymore. I need to make more shit to, excuse me, can I say that? I should stop, right? Make more stuff that will, that will make you feel a certain way, to get you to behave a certain way, because that's kind of what games are.
Awesome. Thank you. Juliet.
Hi. So, where to begin? I had a career before I got into games that centered on employment law and recruitment and other aspects of labor. So fun, right? And, when I was a kid, I had such a deep passion for games. I would make games, so on and so forth. But I never, didn't have the financial luxuries that a lot of kids have. So I went after what I could go after to survive and to make a career for myself where I could, have a roof over my head, any means I could. So I didn't have a lot of choice and options. So that presented a challenge for me, and I really thought I would be able to get into this amazing, wonderful industry. But lo and behold, I was working for a national law firm in New Orleans, and at the time, back in 2011, Gameloft decided to open as a new market a location in New Orleans. And I'd had a career going on in employment law and recruitment for a long time at that point, and I immediately was like, I need this in my life. I am just going to go after this. And
How did you find out?
Literally through a job board. This was the most innocuous, story. It was just saw it, wanted it. I think it was even on the archaic monster.com, which what story starts with that? Right. But I just applied totally traditional channels and went through that recruitment process. And I remember sitting there with the studio manager, and he's asking me, so are you into games? Like, what games do you play of ours? And I was like, I could definitely attest to that. But I was not obviously, and I am not now in the business of creating games, but I have the honor and privilege of hiring people who create and develop games and now publish games, and so that's my story. It was a pretty quick hiring process for me. Fortunately, I felt like it was my own little fairy tale. So,
it does mean you are so far the first member of our panelist, and I wonder if it's going to be the only member of our panel who got hired for a games job as their first games job. It'll be interesting. Thank you, Juliette. Mattia.
Hi. So I guess my background was, like David's, was in film, and I worked in that for about 6 years, which seems to be about that's about like how long the expiration date on that is. And towards the end of it, I found that more and more I was less and less drawn to film, and I was more and more drawn to games, which I had growing up I'd really loved. Really loved, almost to a fault. But I'd sort of put away as a possible category of employment or the kind of thing. Like I just didn't assume that was the sort of thing like one did. That was something that sort of came through the ether, and you did these things propped down in your lap, and you enjoyed them, but you didn't make them. But then I realized how stupid that was, and I decided to change careers and go to grad school. And I went to NYU at ITP. Excuse me. And there, mostly what I did there was just I took every games class that I could find. I learned to make myself useful by learning programming, and so that I could contribute something to projects. And I was interested in design, but I pursued programming, along with the design, so that I could actually make stuff. And then I made a game in a class that I was in, which was this sort of ridiculous, like slapstick street theater thing that was briefly popular. It was this bit of like cultural flotsam that sort of stayed a boy for a little while, called Pac Manhattan, and then I used that to convince my professor at the time that he should hire me as an intern, and then I assured him that like I can program. I'm not just gonna like take up space. I'm gonna actually do something that affects the bottom line, and he hired me, and from that then on I got a job at that company. That's it.
Amazing. Thank you all. So you all, as well as appearing tonight, you all very kindly put some thought into some questions that I sent around earlier in the week about kind of insights into things that you look for in people that you might hire, and myths that you feel are still circulating about what it takes to get hired or to work in the games industry. I've pulled some kind of themes together from those, so I'm going to throw some of that stuff up on the slides and then interrogate you about it. All right? Is that how this works? So, first theme that emerged from this question of what are you looking for? This was probably close to top in all of your answers, were these kind of quotes. So this stuff about being a highly collaborative person, about someone that you have good culture fit with, somebody who's going to do well in a team. This feels mostly very uncontroversial to me, so I'm not going to ask you to explain why those things are good things, because I think we all get that they're good things. But I guess I had maybe two onward questions. So one is, how do I, as an applicant, prove to you that I'm good in a team environment? How do I do that in an application and a 30-minute interview? How do I show you that that's true? Jump in.
Okay.
Go.
So when I interview for an internship or any entry-level role, I obviously ask about academic projects and hobby projects, and preferably team-based, like capstones and things like that. And one of the questions that I like to ask is, tell me, about a situation where your team wasn't getting along, you had an issue, how did you work through that? And the more detailed you can be in telling that story and sharing, something significant that happened, that can tell me a lot about your ability to work through the situation when there's dollars on the line and, jobs and things like that are, going to be adding additional layers to the onion of potential stresses. But it is, of course, harder when someone's not giving you the opportunity to talk about that. So I would suggest finding appropriate times to, to explain that in other ways, or bring that up when it's appropriate in other ways.
Yeah.
I'll jump in and of course echo the same sentiment. We usually try to kind of scare people in interviews, which I mean not in a scary way, but in a sort of stress testing kind of way. And so if you can relay an anecdote where, you and a friend were working on something and then the whole thing fell apart and you overcame that somehow, you don't really need to write a dissertation on that. You can just sort of lob that in there in like a 30-second comment. It's like, oh, actually, I wanted to tell you this. I wanted to share with, because ultimately it's going to be about stress testing and self-organization. That's what sort of the metrics are for cultural fit in my mind. And so if you can show that you can recover from something, that is always more valuable than, oh, we had all green lights, unlimited funding, we had oceans of time, and we did kind of a mediocre thing. It's like, that's really boring, right? So I'm sure you share that.
100%. Like everything Juliet and you said, right? Like you have to be able to tell those stories and convince us. Like at interviews, one of the things that we want to really get from you guys is how well you're making your team look, right? Like if you have to make your team look good, you have to make not just yourself look good, but like your team. Like first of all, you have to make cool games. You should have, excuse me, made stuff that we know our team, that like it's not just you and one other person. That has to be like a team, which is like at least 3 people, 4, maybe even more. And you need to make sure that when you talk about the work, that they look good too, and not just you. And from that, like it's almost like a gut feeling. Like if we hear just you talking about how good you are, that the little red flag goes up in our heads, and we're like, okay, what about it's a collaborative medium, right? Like you need to, you can't just be all you. And we need to hear that.
I have a culture fit question. I know when I'm hiring that this is a thing that I'm looking for. When I write rejection letters that say it was a culture fit problem, they feel like terrible letters to get, right? It's so hard to get rejected on the basis of a thing that you feel like you have no control over. What do you think about that issue? Is there a prep that a candidate can do to come in and have a clearer idea of your company culture and do a better job of communicating the parts of their personality that they feel connect to it? Or is this just something that there's nothing to be done? You're either a fit or you're not, and then it's better to find out early rather than late, and that's just how that goes. So I don't know, I've done a bad job of asking that question, but you're all nodding, so I'm going to trust that you understand me.
That makes sense to me. I guess with the culture fit, there's a sense that, well, first off, like culture fit is very important for us. I mean, obviously for everybody. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have. We actually explicitly look for people who have different backgrounds than us, that we really don't want to be, like the kind of stuff that we do requires us to wear lots of different hats and do random stuff all the time. Like I've done food photography, I've programmed computer vision, and all sorts of stuff, everything in between. So we're like researching on drones. Oh, it's okay. Thank you. And we often have to deal with, work with folks, we want to work with folks who come from backgrounds such as like architecture or studio painting, lots of different things, engineering backgrounds. So with that, we try to look for people who have different backgrounds. What cultural fit means for us generally is not so much like, do you have the same exact tastes as us, but like, do you have an enthusiasm for the kinds of work that we're going to do? Like, so if we tell you like we're going to do this random thing and it's probably going to involve like a projector and who knows, some pool noodles, like we're not really sure how this thing is going to break out. Like you have to be like, sure, like that sounds like I'm game. I want to try that. Like, and it doesn't really matter whether you necessarily have the same exact background as myself or my partner. Like mostly it's just like, are you enthusiastic? Are you game? Like that's mostly what we're looking for in terms of culture.
If I could add something to this idea of, experiencing the rejection specifically, I would, my personal, and this is, my opinion, everybody's opinion here, is that it's better to be yourself and get rejected for who you are and take your business elsewhere to somewhere that will appreciate you and like you as you are, than it is to try and pretend to be someone else. That is not to say that there are not collaborative skills that you might need to learn or other things. It's a tricky thing, but culture fit is one of those vague terms that I'd always rather be a little bit more specific than use that term. If I'm going to share some feedback, I don't always share feedback because it's not always appropriate, but when I do, I try and be real specific because I want to help people really move forward in their careers. And maybe it's something that, they're like, you know what, I hear you. I like myself the way I am, and then that's cool,
I'm always surprised at how, when I encounter it, how sincere it is. I think when I wasn't on the hiring side of the table, I always thought it was like a euphemism for something else they didn't like. But now that I hire, I know that it is, I think we're all kind of describing the same thing. You're going to be in a room with this person dozens of hours a week trying to make the same thing, and if they're not psyched to be making that thing, you're going to be in trouble. So it does matter. All right, next slide. Look at that. It just perfectly, it's like I planned it. So there was a couple, so again, this little group of stuff I thought was really interesting because the games world is not short of passion, right? The story you just told of sitting in an interview and like listing 400 games that you care about, probably everyone here has done that or something similar. But what I liked about these was they were kind of focused, they were like asking for more focus on that. They were saying like just being fire hose excited about games isn't enough, and in some cases isn't necessarily helpful. That this isn't just about bringing your obsessive passion in and assuming that you're going to be able to like service it in a gaming job. It's about changing it around. So, Juliet, yours is the middle quote. Can you tell me a little bit about?
You gotta call me out like that.
Yeah, well, you should write less interesting stuff then. I'm just saying. That's how that goes.
Oh, you want me to expand on it?
Yeah, just because I think I know where you're going, but I'd love to hear you say it.
Yeah, I think that having a really, organic sort of genuine passion for games is essential, obviously, to being part of this industry. But if you present yourself as someone who is exclusively motivated by an obsession with games, you may come across as sort of missing the point almost, or not being able to focus on the service of the work itself, and that's a red flag for sure. Because we are all fanboys and fangirls of the industry that we're in, but there is a limit to, you have to be a professional at work, and you have to also be focused on the work. And there's like a disillusionment that there's a concern about as well, that you just really are clued out and don't really know what the industry is kind of all about, Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and there's lots more there we're going to talk to. Yes, was an openness of mind you? Oh, it was David. No, it was David. I'm sure you.
Both of us
maybe,
had it.
see?
I want to
Common
say something
themes.
smart, but
Sure. So that's me. So I'm this big floofy thinker person where I think that games is really like it's a great label for essentially a system which allows you to where your behavior is like intrinsically motivated, right? Like that you're basically building a system that allows people to sort of like do things that you want them to do, and they want to do it. And games traditionally are really good at that, through mechanics, through story, through a billion other things they get of ways to get you to do the things they do. And the reality is, we want, for us, when we hire, we want interdisciplinarians who have that mentality, but who can also bring in a different set of skills. I know we all here love the games that we love, but we also want people outside of that who can bring in new blood to the table, who can approach a problem with a different solution than one we always see from the games industry. That's what excites us more than whether or not you have, who worked on what game and which mechanic you love from the game you love, right? But that's just us. We're a small team, and we like big thinkers like that.
I'll chime in for just a moment, which is, so in my experience as being on the hiring side of the table as well as teaching in a class, what differentiates people, for me at least, is the ones that rationalize their passion. I know I love to run around the park every day, but that's a different thing than going to the Olympics, right? And so if I want to go to the Olympics, I got to think of all these things. I got to kind of quantify some of my efforts, like my intake of calories. I got to practice all the time, maybe on those days that I don't want to do these things, but I have a bigger goal in mind. And so cultural fit or openness of mind, like those things all, for me, speak to you have a plan. Like show with some kind of direction, shows that you know who you are and that you have a sense. And that's where, a rejection kind of is an obvious moment. You can say like, well, we were going this way, but have fun going that way. We respect you, you're doing great stuff, it's just not a good fit. But you gotta ask those questions yourself first. And that's confrontational because, it's much easier to just kind of play games and love that. It's a whole other thing to say, okay, well now I'm gonna show up at 9 at Monday morning and put myself out there a few times. So the rationalization of that passion is key for us.
That's a great note. This next slide, also very, I hope, non-controversial. But again, it was interesting how near the list near the top of the list, a lot of this stuff was for you, was about just being kind of an engaged, thoughtful, expressive human being rather than anything else. Is it fair for me to put this much emphasis on this, would you say? This is just thumbs up all round? I really liked players. So yeah, was that you, I think?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little about why that matters to you in a hire?
Yeah, I mean, and that one is because it's not just being good humans, although it is. Ultimately, the game design is about you're trying to communicate with somebody else through a system. You're trying to engineer an experience, and fundamentally, what that means is you have to think about somebody else's mind. Anything else is just a waste of time to some degree. That's actually something. It often, what I meant by that quote was that often we'll talk to folks, and we're liable to this ourselves. I think everybody who works in games is liable to this to some degree, where you start becoming enamored of some particular aspect of it. You're like, oh, if I just, this mechanic is so great, the system is so great, oh, I just want to make this thing, I want to make roguelikes so awesome. And you forget that there's another human being at the other end of this, and maybe they don't want a roguelike, and maybe this particular context doesn't require that. Maybe the decisions that you're making, which are fit within a genre context, within a mechanics context, within some aesthetic context, don't actually drive the experience that you're trying to get across through. And so you have to be very brutal about that during the process of development. And we tend to look for people who are able to do that. We're able to say, I don't actually care. I'm not that married necessarily. I don't have some X to grind regarding mechanics, etc. I'm just trying to figure out how do I get from point A to B, where point B being that player's mind and that player's experience.
I wish I'd tweeted every word of that. So, interestingly, only now do we get to this question of skill sets. This is where I used to think your thought process as potential employers would start, is can I go through this checklist of particular skills? And going through your comments, I felt like I noticed two things. One of which was a very understandable, straight down the line requirement that says you need to. Do Americans say know your onions? Is that a thing I can?
No, we do not.
You need to know your onions. Step one, know your onions. So you need to know your stuff. You need to. It's a baseline requirement. But then I think the other trend that came in through a number of you was also this kind of speed of learning and flexibility of working. That maybe what you know how to do right now is only half the story, and the other half is if you're hired into this position, how quickly will you be able to hop onto some of these other, I stole your good quote because it's a good quote, the other crazy things that you might need to do, even just in the time that we were talking before the panel started, we were very quickly talking about flexibility and how jobs morph and change. So is that a thing applicants should be, so as well as doing the simple job of saying, you said I need to know C# and I know C#, should they be deliberately trying to emphasize their speed of learning and their flexibility of work practice? David's nodding, so I'm going to make him answer.
Sure. Yes.
Great. Next question.
Next question. No.
But yeah, keep going.
Yeah. So for me, this is the last thing I put in my list, right? So it's almost granted that you need to be good at what you do, right? You're competing against a lot of other people who are also really good at what they do. So how do you differentiate yourself, right? I think everything else we talked about, definitely flexibility, and that's sort of kind of related to what we talked about previously about being a good human being and curiosity of humankind, which was what I put up there. You need to be able to apply your skills and transfer them to different disciplines. Okay, so right now, I'm doing virtual reality. It's not really games, so I'm not, even sure if I'm supposed to direct. Scandal. Because I know the thing is, what it does is it borrows from games. Like the skills you learn in game design and in game development and programming are transferable to virtual reality, right? Like these are things that you can move them across, and you need to be able to think beyond just like whether or not, this 2D roguelike that I'm building is just good for being a roguelike. Those mechanics and systems can be transferable over to how you direct attention in virtual reality in the 3D space as well. These are, we're looking for people who have the skills, who can think broadly enough to be able to do that sort of thinking. And was that sort of answer your question?
Wonderful.
Yeah. Cool.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes.
Because this is actually something that's important. This flexibility is particularly important for us, in large part because we're a small company. I mean, both because of the nature of the work that we do, but also because we're a very, very small company. And this was also my experience when I first started my first job in the game industry. I was working for a very small company. There was 5 other people there. And that's particularly true. And I think if you're in New York, there's a high likelihood of working in an indie context in which there's going to be few people. And there's less likelihood that you're going to find a situation that demands a high degree of it's not that it doesn't demand a high degree of specialization, that allows you a job that is composed exclusively of highly specialized tasks. That you're like, I'm just a shader programmer. That's all I do. Like, I just do physics, nothing else. Like, that's great. That's fantastic. The likelihood of you being able to find a job in a small indie company where, like, how's your accounting? Like, I mean, maybe not that. You're not going to hire somebody to do that. But that general idea that, like, flexibility is particularly important in small company contexts. So keep that in mind when you're looking at where you're applying.
By the way, I just realized "Know Your Onion" is a Shin song.
Oh, really?
It is.
There you go.
Yes, thank you.
I feel 8% less embarrassed than I did a minute ago. Okay, so there was less common ground on the big myths, and it's possible that I have added some sensational headlines to them, it being 2017 and all that. And I can't remember what they are, so let's find out together. So actually, this was a big common source. Don't kid yourself, this isn't going to be hard. And I think you all hit this note in a bunch of different ways, which is, yes, you're following your passion. Yes, you're doing the thing you love, but games are mostly made of work, not love, and that's not always easy. I liked... Oh, I can't remember who it was. Does somebody recognize the orange quote at the bottom? It was David. Is that you? That's you.
No, that's not me.
Oh.
I wish I said that, though.
It's nice. Who was... Oh, it was you. It was Juliet.
I think it might...
Maybe it was me.
You take it if it makes sense to you, too.
So the context of it was saying that
Feels
it's
like
easy,
I wrote it.
It's easy to be... I do remember it vividly. I just don't remember in which email I read it. It was in the context of saying it can be easy to be kind of... Because I think
yes, I remember exactly when I wrote this. It was in the context of the idea when someone will come in at the entry level and they are so enthusiastic, and there's a balance that we have to strike to not quash that enthusiasm. Meanwhile, they're ready to take, like, your job. They think they know better than you, and you don't need to be the creative director because they got this. That is the context in which I wrote this, that, ultimately when you get in the door and you start getting comfortable, there is a strong tendency to start thinking, I know these ropes. They're making all the wrong decisions. I know better. When am I going to get promoted? When are they going to see that I need to be the creative director? And that guy doesn't know what he's doing. And the reality is that you don't know what you're doing. And your enthusiasm is fantastic, but you don't know yet what you don't know, and that there's a lot behind that you're not seeing with these people who have 6, 10, 20 years on you. That's something that I see a lot, and it's not an easy situation to resolve from my perspective. You have to respect those people that came before you. I promise you that they know so much shit that you don't. You have no idea.
But what I also loved about that angle is, like, it really shines a light on how that work pays off, right? This message, which is those people aren't made of magic, they just got here a long time ago and worked and worked and worked and learned and were flexible and, you know, did all of that stuff. And that just because it's tough doesn't mean that it's not rewarding and not fulfilling and not a place where you get in the end. And that certainly is a thing I recognize from working in games, and it felt like it was coming through from a lot of you. I couldn't believe that we're still dealing with this myth. So sorry, Julia, this is also you. I promise that wasn't on purpose. But yeah, so is this something you still encounter?
I encounter it all the time. I'm actually interested to see if the other panelists agree with this one.
Are you guys hearing from people who think they're going to get to just play games all day?
So, I haven't played, and I'm so ashamed to say this, I haven't played a proper game in so long. I've like a list that's growing, like Horizon Zero Dawn, like, you know, freaking Nier Automata. Like it grows. I haven't played a game since I think last year. That's how long since I mean like anything fun, to be honest, because when you make games, that's all you're really playing a lot of the time, and you have to play test that, you have to shop it out, you have to bring it out to another place to play test it again, and I wish I had time to play games though. I really do.
We're different. We do play games a lot. So sorry.
Yeah.
It's but it has everything to do with our main role as a service provider or a research provider. I can't credibly go into a studio or a publisher's office and say like, oh, you should totally make Red Dead Redemption 2 all about some other. I can't provide any input if I don't know what I'm talking about, because they'll call me out on it, and especially because they'll look at me with skepticism. So to that end, what we do is we had to institutionalize a rule last year to not play games, only play games during lunch hour and after 5. Because it just was getting a little out of hand, but everybody gets a stipend every month to like go buy games, and because that's part of it. We do game nights, we have Magic Draft, we have VR nights in the office. We have a few people that are designing games, and so we bring people from outside in to kind of play test, because I hate this so much. So I go to, as a researcher, I go to conferences all day long, more than I want to tell you about, and I meet all these people that also are service providers or vendors of whatever, and it's, when you ask them person to person, like, what do you play? And they go, and to me, that's sort of like, look, if I was in the film business and I walk up to anybody and say like, well, what's the last movie you watched? It's like, I don't know, I don't watch movies. You'd be outcast immediately. You'd be like, who is this crazy person doing here? And so for that reason, I kind of maybe deliberately enforce that, but it works well with the culture too, because it's their subject matter of research, but I also think it should be part of the fabric. So sorry, we persist in the myth.
I just want to add to that we also do play games and have Magic Drafts and stuff like that. I think when I wrote this, I was thinking more in terms of the work hours themselves,
Right, of course. Sorry, I'm just distracted because it sounds like we need to organize a New York Magic Draft playoff.
Bring it.
Yes.
Because we also have a Magic Draft.
We have pro circuit playoffs.
I haven't found that much from folks that work, who either work or want to work in the game industry, that they have that myth. I mean, it's often exterior. Like what we often get is that, like, when we'll get somebody who's doing like some journalist is doing a piece, and they're like shooting some video, and they're like, all right, show us you guys working, and we're like, yeah, this is it. They're like, can you make like that code that you're writing more fun? I'm like, no, this is pretty much as fun as writing code gets. Like, at least from the outside, And they're like, and they literally asked us, they're like, can you put on masks? And we're like, no. Well, actually, I think we did once, but yeah, so I don't get that much internally. It seems to be like a persistent external notion about the game industry, but I don't know how much it still is internal.
I'm glad to hear that it's on the way out. I think this is a thing that I slightly put down because I found an old slide deck of a talk I gave to some Columbia students, and I couldn't believe when I found out how horrible I'd been to them. But part of it was just addressing this really difficult question of games is a thing that we're wildly passionate about. We invest a huge amount of our time and energy into it. And, I know as somebody who used to be desperate to get into the games industry, how hard I worked and how much I wanted to do it. Just this kind of tough love truth that it's not necessarily going to get it done. That hard work, but as an employer, I'm going to say something brutal. Everybody get ready. as someone who hires people, I don't care how hard you worked. It doesn't mean anything to me. I care about how well you're going to do the job that I need done, and that's going to include all of these kind of soft skill things that we talked about in terms of, you know, are you going to be a good person to work with, and are you going to encourage your teammates and all the rest of it. But this is the scary question that I wanted to ask you all, do you think people do need a bit of a reality check about how tough it is, about how competitive it is, and how high the kind of skill requirements are, if they're really going to get a job in an industry that's growing but still doesn't have 100 million jobs in it?
So you guys have seen the talk that Rami has given, right? And on just working in the games industry and the indie apocalypse. Say yes.
Yes.
Good. Because I think that's like literally like I think the best one I've seen so far, where he talks about like how like it's not going to be easy. Like these are the people who are making games, they're better than you, and they are not making a lot of money, and they're better than you. So it's not going to be easy. In fact, I think I'm just really lucky to be what I'm doing and where I am today. Like it's a lot of working hard, it's a lot of showing up on time, and it's a lot of luck. But it's really those three things, for me at least. But it's hard.
Yeah, I think that there is a misperception that the working hard is the thing that that directly gets you in or something like that. Whereas I think the reality is that the working hard is what gets you the skill to produce work that qualifies as something to get you in, and that's a long road. And the working hard is essential. I don't want anyone to think that, we're saying we expect you to breeze through and create some brilliant masterpiece. The working hard is appreciated, but we're all doing it, And I feel like talking to all of you, you're no stranger to working hard. You're probably exhausted, and I commend every one of you for being here tonight, given that you probably have a billion projects and deadlines and classes. So yeah, that's
a good note. I've got a horrible feeling I've got another mean slide after this, so... No, it's an optimistic slide. Look, it's orange. So I love this note, and I'm not going to pretend I can remember whose quote to whose anymore. This was about the question of that we still maybe have a slightly narrow perception of what the games industry is and what the jobs that are in the games industry are. So does anyone want to talk a little bit about an element of the games industry we think you're good to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was when you had asked what myths, what is the primary myth of the myths that you think of the game industry, and going into the game industry or being an aspirant into the game industry, having a sense that I wanted to enter the game industry, I had this notion of it as being extremely narrow. Like if you ask me, like, what is the game industry? It's like, oh, it's like retail digital games. Like that's what the game industry is. And like the jobs that are available within that context are like, there's programmers, there's artists making like 3D models and or like sprites, and then there's designers, and that's it. Actually, at the time, I even have thought there's programmers. Once I started getting into it, I started realizing, and my work is sort of proof of it, like our company's proof of it, is that it's much, much broader than that. And you start discovering that the game industry overlaps a variety of different industries. So there's lots of jobs that are sort of like, that have one foot inside of it and outside of it. This is particularly true, I think, in New York, where there is an advertising world which you interact with. And we've done museum installations. We did like a project with Benjamin Moore Paint. We've done all sorts of stuff. And if you should allow yourself the sense that like it is going to be larger, and like give yourself some hope in that there are many opportunities to apply your trade within the game industry that aren't just like working on Halo. This is not to knock working on Halo, but just like it is way bigger than that. Like there are so many other opportunities, and if you're flexible and you say like, oh, what if I really just want to like talk to players in some way or like connect with players in some way, like there's lots of ways to do that.
I strongly agree.
120%, all that.
And part of what we try to do today is have some more people come along who maybe have less traditional roles in the games industry, so people who are not necessarily working in those kind of classical artist, programmer, game designer slots, if you're curious about hearing a little bit about a different kind of working in the games industry. I think this is maybe the last slide. I just thought this was an important point about companies. I work for a mobile free-to-play studio. And we used to think those were the devil, and some people still do, right? That free-to-play is killing games and all of that. And I think one of the things that you start to see as you move into working in games is you're inside that world where a bunch of super passionate game nerds are trying to balance their enthusiasm for the form with having a job that means they can eat, right? It's that thing. And so I wondered once you started working in games, did it change your perception of the kind of financial motivations and structures of people running game companies? Maybe I'm just bringing my free-to-play guilt into the conversation, and I should.
I've always been fairly, I don't have a business degree, but I've always been fairly savvy when it comes to business and understood business. So I don't think it was a huge surprise to me, but I've seen it surprise so many people. You know, that's what kind of this thought is all about for me. And I'm sure there's some evil people in the industry somewhere who, you know, sure. But by and large, you know, what you see here is the truth. And you know, going back to what you just said about how big the games industry is, and you talking about mobile free-to-play, I think that's a perfect example. You know, not every mobile free-to-play game by a long shot is just out to make profit at this, you know, sacrifice small animals, you know, whatever it takes. They're no more or less interested in profit than any other game creator that makes a commercially oriented game.
Yeah, I guess sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I guess coming from film, I was used to the idea that creative industries involve like a huge glut of labor, they're hit driven, and so therefore like the likelihood of success is extremely low, and it takes a lot of people to make a game, and it takes a lot of people to make a movie, and since your likelihood of success is so low, like it's going to be very hard to make ends meet, and it's going to be hard to like maintain success. I mean, that's the thing that, and I had a notion of that, but it was certainly reinforced when I started started working in the game industry, is that companies are extremely volatile in this space. Like, I mean, like, it's hard to stick around. Like, it's just hard to be around for more than, you know, a couple of cycles of projects. Like, because it just takes like the amount of effort usually required to do stuff, it means that like one failure and you're out. Like that's it, you're knocked out. So I mean, I guess I never really romanticized it, but it did get reinforced when I actually started working there. Like how, and I think it's probably even more so than film in some ways. Like it is even more volatile in games.
I want to add one thing, and that is that being in the position that I'm in, when a studio shuts down, I talk to almost every single one of those people, including the executives who are in some part responsible for the decisions that led to that outcome. And I've never once had one of them go, ha-ha!
That is reassuring.
Can
all right.
I jump in?
Yes,
one second?
of course.
So it occurs to me now, so I'm not, again, the game designer in the crew here, but so, you know, as we talk about this, my mind goes back to the world that I grew up in, and it was a world, you know, I'm originally from the Netherlands, where things just always will stay the fucking same. Sorry, can I say fuck? And it's, you know...
In that one context, you can.
And the net result is that, you know, I was raised by a generation that said, like, you just sign up for a big insurance company, and that's where you'll work for 40 years, and everything's going to be fine. And so, you know, it seems to me that, you know, game design or a creative effort, whether games or music or film, for that matter, or VR, you know, is ultimately this sort of perpetual process of self-manifestation with no win condition. There is no moment that you're going to say, oh, I'm done. I've made it. I'm a whatever person in programming, and that's it now. I'm going to do that for 30 years. You're going to always have to rely on your own skill set and move forward from there. And so the second you believe that that's somehow that there's a manual to this stuff, you're probably in the wrong industry. This is a creative business, right? So you're always going to have to make some rational decisions in order to perpetuate or pursue a career. And so, sure, you know, free to play might seem evil to people, but if you really look at it from a designer perspective, it's just a parameter of what you're supposed to be doing, right? If we were designing games 20 years ago, yeah, now you're stuck with this boxed model of $60, a 5-year cycle that cost $100 million just to promote. So that's a different design circumstance than a free-to-play model. If you're so good, then why is that a problem, right? To design around the issue, because that's what you do. You work with limitations. So those are sort of my 2 cents that I see across companies in that sense.
I just want to quickly add as well, like there's a difference between the games industry and just making games, right? And you're welcome and free and should make games for your own personal pleasure. But the fact that we have jobs in the industry means accepting the fact that profits is going to be this duality between creativity and commerce. Like they're there to support each other. And just because free to play is one parameter doesn't mean that it's like there's no value judgment to that. It's just one way of making money to fuel the system so that you can be creative, and you're welcome to invent a new, different way as well. Like, you know, it's games are bigger than what we have right now, and they will continue to grow and be bigger than what we have today as well. So just my 2 cents.
What a gorgeous ending note. Look at that. Questions? Accusations?
Maybe not those.
Yeah, I had a question about,
Don't know.
you were talking about...
I'll repeat it. So just ask
you were
Greg.
talking about that the people who have been in the industry for a long time, you know, coming in with a lot of enthusiasm and not, in my sense, like thinking that you know better than them, but thinking like, I've been playing a lot of games and here's maybe what I suggest might be a cool alternative, and like, is it acceptable to put it out there even if you know, can get shot down, you know, but just because I want to learn what they know, right? So I don't know, what's your stance on that and like being able to put ideas out there?
So I apologize, I won't do it justice, but you mentioned that there can be a problem with people coming in who are a little bit too know-it-all, a little bit too sure that they know the right answers. How do you avoid being one of those people while still being someone who does make suggestions and does want to learn and does want to open up those conversations?
No, I think there's a real distinction between the two behaviors. One is sort of more of a negative, developing sort of a negative attitude and sort of a sense of superiority that is sort of foundationless. The other, to have ideas, is amazing. Ideas are fantastic. You should 100% present them, when you have something they're excited about. I think that you basically stated, something similar. I would say if you're in a small company, that's probably going to be pretty encouraged, and you'll probably be presented opportunities. They're going to proactively draw from you for ideas. If you're in a larger company, it is incumbent on you to develop a relationship with your leader, whoever that is, your lead designer, to be able to have those conversations, because there might be, I'm not going to tell you there's no politics in a large company, there might be, but generally, you're going to be with someone who is looking to move things forward, and so you want to develop a relationship and like have that kind of collaborative thing where you are having those conversations on a regular basis, or as they arrive naturally.
If I could just add one thing that's a really good question, because I think that is one of the myths that now I missed in responding to Margaret's email, which is that there's a myth that like ideas are highly valuable, which I mean they are, but like ideas are also cheap. I mean, like there's a way in which like everybody has ideas. Like the guy that you're talking to like has a lot of ideas that he hasn't made, and there's reasons why, like lack of time. He or she realizes like the actual difficulties and hasn't found the proper context for it. Like, which isn't to say like you should be discouraged from having ideas, but you should probably you should learn. And everybody should learn. I'm not singling you out. I had this problem starting out too, like being able to put them in the proper context and realize like this idea is not very valuable because I don't have the proper understanding of the complexity of the actual problem that this design idea exists in, and until I do, I'm going to have a very hard time actually making it real. And so I should have deference to those who have more experience and understand that like if they're not doing this one thing, if they're not like, oh, why don't you just make the button purple and put it here? It's so obvious, and it's like. It may be because they're wrong, but it also may be just because they know more. And so just have that sense of distance from your own ideas.
Yeah.
So, short answer, it's all about the delivery. It's true, though.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, he's right, and you can present all the ideas, and you should, but know that they can be shot down, and you should be okay with that. Just be okay with it.
Whoa. When did that happen? All right.
Are these the accusations?
I have no idea how to make decisions. I'm going to start with you because you're nearest.
Oh, okay. This is a question for myself, and I know at least a few other people in this audience. I know that like having a degree in game design is kind of a new thing, and I'm curious that as people who are looking at people coming in and looking for jobs, how do you view people coming in with a game design degree? Like, I guess related to the topics of enthusiasm and skill set. Like, is that an indicator of maybe too much specialization, or like is that something that you're wary of?
It depends.
Sorry, let me just rephrase it. Super good, slightly incendiary question. How do you value game design degrees?
So I was about to say it depends on which school the degree is from.
Is the right answer.
No, I mean it isn't. I think it exists to make your parents happy, to be honest. Like, but I was half serious about which school you're from, because like we know that the Game Center has great students, right? So we know you graduated from your Game Center, for example. Like, we'll be more willing to sort of go through your portfolio after that. It's almost like you pass the first gate, but there's still more gates to go, But you don't need a good degree. Like, at the end of the day, we look at your portfolio and the quality of work that you've done, where you're from. It's my answer. Sorry.
Thank you. I do generally, when it comes to designers, for example, if someone has a game design degree, but I was going to say the same thing. I try and get to know, to the best of my ability, all of the programs. I try and get to know some of the professors. I try and understand what they emphasize, what they don't emphasize. That changes over time. So, try and keep up with that. I tend to think, that a degree is not requisite, but the likelihood that you have self-taught yourself the equivalent of what a very well-thought program can provide you is low. So there you have it.
Does that answer you?
If I'll smear it out a little bit broader and say, irrespective of the topic or the subject matter, we've let people go in the past that had a degree and felt, oh, I'm here now, right? And so he mentions the gates. It's like the degree itself is important because it differentiates you. The school is important, but ultimately it's like the best thing you bring is you. And so if there's a mindset behind a PhD or some kind of Harvard thing, or pick something fancy and shiny, it's really about how did you deal with the people there. And so it's about building the network, right? And so here in New York, it's great to be at this particular center because it connects you to a much larger community. And so if you do well in that regard, that's a much more valuable piece than, oh, great, you did this for 2 years, right? There's no win condition, again.
I'm going to go all the way over there to the back. That's you. Nice and loud.
Hi, guys. So I have a question about like when you're just starting out in the gaming industry. So, because you guys are in the gaming industry, you guys probably know it better than most of us here. So do you think that it's more valuable if you're just starting out to do like an entrepreneur startup route, or do you think it'd be more valuable to maybe hop on like a big gaming company like an EA or a Bethesda and see what they're doing?
Is it better to get started as an entrepreneur startup or with a job in a big established studio?
I mean, what games do you want to make? No, but in a sense, like, what industry do you want to work in? Because that's like, it's like asking. Like, sorry that I keep on going back to film, but like it's like asking, like, if I say like, I want to be a documentary director, like me going and working with Michael Bay is probably not a particularly good way to pursue that.
That would be a hell of a documentary, though.
or maybe it could. But because the industry is so varied, like, and you get different things based on the kind of what the company does, the kinds of games that they make, the corporate culture of the company, also just the size of the company. You get very different things in small or large companies. generally, I'm biased towards this because my experience is in small companies. I would argue that small companies are probably a good place to start because the chances of you having lots of responsibility and getting an overview of how a company works and the kinds of difficulties that are entailed are much higher than if you're in a larger company. But I say this as never having worked at a very large company.
I mean, my 2 cents would be if you want to make big AAA games, you have to go that route. It's not, I've got a demi-respectable indie mobile career. I'm not walking into a job directing a AAA game anytime soon. It's just the experience is not remotely relevant. So if that's where you're going, that's a route you have to take. Entirely agree that small studios are the best place to learn everything you could want to learn about how stuff works. Okay. It's hard to see. Check shirt, gentlemen.
So I spend a lot of my day job hiring interns. Do you quantify the success of your hiring practices? And if so, how do you do that?
How do you quantify the success of your hiring practices?
So in the past, there's a couple of metrics that you can put to that and to hiring in general. One is, obviously, do they get promoted to full-time hire? If they do, how long do they stay? What's the retention metric? If they stay, what are their performance evaluations and feedbacks from their managers looking like? Are they identified as a high potential, high performer? Do they get promoted from there? Things like that. So that is dependent and typical with more large companies when you have a high volume of workforce and a high volume of, and a longer term to look at, just like with any data. But yeah, that's how you do it.
Here.
Me?
Yeah.
All right. So just going back to what you guys said about being flexible and needing soft skills and how soft skills are valued, on my resume in written form, it's like absolute crap. Like it just looks like I don't know anything. So is there a way for me to show like what David said about like the first gate? How do I pass the first gate? I know I have soft skills. I know I can work in a fast environment, in a stressful environment, and I'm like really motivated to work. So how can I put that on a sheet of paper?
How do you put soft skills on a resume without looking like an idiot? Is that fair? Yeah. Is that it? Yeah, right.
So it's really, really hard. Generally, we look at resumes first to say, okay, this person's not like applying from nowhere. So you have some skills, and then after that we look at your portfolio, right? I'm like, okay, this person has worked on cool stuff. And then after that, we'll probably want to talk to you. And I guess that's where you can sort of let that soft skill shine, depending which soft skill you're talking about. But generally, we want to have a good vibe with you. Generally when you get an interview, it's like, this person seems cool enough already. We just want to confirm that she's actually cool.
No, as if you weren't already scared enough of interviews. I would say I'm old-fashioned enough to be a fan of the cover letter, and for me that's everything I need. That I can tell in 2 paragraphs of you actually writing and talking to me about why you want this job and why you want to come work at the company. That gives me as good a read as I need to get to the interview stage.
Actually, that's a really good point. And actually, in our applications, we always make you not write a cover letter, but we usually ask you a few questions, and how you answer them, it really tells us a lot about how you think.
In the middle of the back. No, further back. You. Yep.
I just want to talk about the size and scope of how video games have become so far. Like a couple of years ago, there is now a human company that is mainstream that was so afraid to call when their console or console computer companies are responding to their So at the moment, we have like a cash cow selection of variable video games. It's an industry now that what we back then was like, oh, it's a kid's game. How does that feel like an existential thing now? Because it's so big, and back then it used to be like, oh, whatever.
That I feel rocked to my core. So this is a very big question of the games industry has been through. I'm going to paraphrase. You're going to tell me how I do. A kind of existential change over its history that I always think starts in 1959, but other people don't agree. A many, many decade history where it wasn't taken seriously, was dismissed as a toy. It's now a very, very big industry. How has that kind of changed? I think I'm going to put a little recruitment-y spin on it, because this has been a big thing for me. How has it changed how you talk to people about your jobs? Do you still apologize to people for working in the games industry? I have
No.
my old colleague's mum she'd written an email to her mum when she got a new job, and her mum cut the sentence out of the email and stuck it on the fridge so that when people called to ask how her daughter was doing, she could read out what her job was, because her mum just couldn't make any sense of what her job was. So are we still there, or as this industry evolves in the way that we've outlined, is that starting to change?
I'll be very black and white, no. So we really need to knock that off, right? It's true that we come from that place where we were on the fringes, either as game players or as creatives or as people doing this. For 20 years, I spent apologizing to professors and parents and employers, saying like, what I really want to do is this, or what I really think is interesting is that. And at some point, you just got to stop being afraid, because screw them. This is who you are. This is what you want to do. In my mind, in many ways, this is a whole generation of new creatives. And, I don't think a lot of the people that made stuff in the past spend a lot of time apologizing and making excuses. You gotta surrender to the fear and just let it be for what it is. And so for those reasons, like, don't apologize. Screw them. They just don't see the potential. They don't understand the emotional capacity what games have to offer. They don't understand the career prospects in this. And sure, it's hard and it's a long road, but why would you be a painter in the 17th century? Shit, go make a fire and like raise a farm or something. Seems like a much better way to spend your time. So for all those reasons, it's not a rational thing, but so therefore you can't expect everybody else to just kind of sign off and give you a green light. It's like, oh, okay. Certainly, like I had to like give my mom also a line to say, when I talk to my friends, what do I tell them? It's like, just tell them this one thing. And then she was okay with it. It actually alleviated a lot of distress. But you can't, because it belies a sort of internal monologue where you don't believe really what you do. You got to stop doing that.
So I have a really complex answer, and I'm not sure if we're running out of time. By the way, guys, thank you so much for bearing with us talking. Like Juliet said, I know all of you are really tired, so thank you. It's really, really complicated for us in virtual reality. Part of our job is trying to get people into the headset and to realize how amazing sick stuff virtual reality is versus 360 video, which people still think is virtual reality, but it's not. And it's so hard when you see CG, game engine stuff, to say, oh, you guys making games, I'm not a gamer. Boom, they're out. So, I mean, the head fake is, yes, we're actually making games in virtual reality. We're just not calling them games. And secretly inside, I still think we're developing games, but we're just not calling them games. But to the wider world of Viacom, because we're a media company, we'll say, no, this is virtual reality. It's a super inclusive medium. It's the future of entertainment. Come and check it out. No, this is not a game. So it's really complicated.
You guys should fight, right? That's what just happened.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you say. I believe, no, and I'm in full agreement. I just wish we're in a position that we could say that right now, but we're not there yet for us.
I understand. So I'm talking about the internal part of that conversation. Like, don't let it shake you. And you clearly are aware of the mindset on the other side of the table, right?
Yeah.
When I talk to financial analysts, they sit